Hey, glory to Jesus Christ, glory forever. Christ is baptized, Christ is born, depending on which calendar you're on. For me, they're both true, and for all of us, they're both true. Today, it is in my world, it's the 12th of January, new style, 2021, and we're in the midst of some interesting times. And it's important when you're going through difficult times not to do it alone, right? And one of the people that I am happy to have in my corner, or I'm in his corner, we're in the same corner, we're in the field together, whatever it is, that I'm so blessed to have Father Gregory Jensen, who is, I don't know if he's a voice of sanity, but he's certainly willing to tell me things I don't want to hear, which is, is very important.
That's right, babies. Bad tempered and yeah. Oh, yeah. Just 24 years this past December. So thank you. Thank you. Long time. I have, and these days I mostly see it standing by the retired priests because they're the only ones older than me. But yeah, indeed. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Indeed. All right. Well, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for referring to yourself as a kid and me as a graybeard. It's funny because I was thinking just this morning. It's like 24, heading for 25 years as a priest, and I'm thinking back in my first years as a priest, and I'm all I can think of is there were a lot of really patient men in my life. Thank God, because I was a jackass. Uh, a jackass with a cassock in a cassock. But it's I think I think one of the great temptations that we have as priests is that we want to step in on one side or another on these debates. Um, and I've seen on Facebook, priests who are talking about how the election was stolen. Um, um, I'm not really sure what if that's the most helpful thing. I've seen, earlier this summer, priests stepping in on the side of accusing all the police in the U.S. of being racist. I understand we want to take a stand on great moral issues, but I think we need to do that judiciously and thoughtfully. And if my opinion about a moral issue um, is basically something that could be a headline at Breitbart or the New York Times, then I'm probably not bearing witness to the gospel. and I'm getting swept away in the stuff that goes on. One of my professors in graduate school, I always like to quote him because he did a good job. Father Adrian von Kamm, Catholic priest and psychologist. He talks about how there are what he called social pulsions, and what he meant by that is that there are these forces that move through a social group and push us in particular directions, and they're strictly speaking pre-moral. And I mean, this is what I mean. You see this in a riot. It isn't that any individual is thinking, malicious thoughts, but even people with basically good thoughts can just get swept away by the passion or the emotion of the moment. So I think that's the first thing we need to do is make sure we remain detached from what's going on around us. That doesn't mean we're indifferent, but we can't let ourselves get swept away.
Yeah, and can you describe a little bit about what it looks like to get swept away? Because I'm not sure I would notice. So I see this moral question coming up, and that I have strong moral instincts
Yeah.
one way or the other. And as a pastor, someone who gives moral guidance, I weigh in, I offer wisdom, I offer a framing that will allow people to engage with this issue in a way that is, holy and godly.
Well, yeah. Well, I think one of the first things is my response. Am I angry? I mean, you mentioned despairing earlier. Saint Barsanuphius and John in the Philokalia. I think it was Saint Barsanuphius. I hope it was, but even if it wasn't, it's great to say his name. Said whenever you feel an overwhelming desire to speak, that's not from God. So if I feel overwhelmed by the need to stand up on Sunday morning and give people that moral framework, I need to step back and ask myself, is this really from God, or is this my own ego or my own fear sort of moving forward? So am I angry? Am I agitated? Is that kind of going on in my emotional life? Am I short-tempered?
So does that mean that I should only speak on things that I don't care about? How do you
Well,
work that?
yeah. T.S. Eliot said the goal is to care and not to care. And I think that's, we have to care, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm me. And, so it is hard, but, I mean, I'll be direct with you. Most priests have MDivs, and really very little, if any, undergraduate, to say nothing of any graduate training in morality, public policy, politics, philosophy. So maybe it would be better if they didn't say anything. I had there's a whole. I mean, I've had conversations with people on Facebook, and I have a whole series of posts from someone about COVID-19 and masks and the spread of the illness, and all the stuff he posts it's perfectly reasonable. And a lot of it is he's posting studies, and I'm getting back to clergy in a minute. But at some point I'm going to have to tell this guy, it's like, quoting scientific studies doesn't mean that you're making a scientific argument, because there are other studies that come up with different conclusions about these same topics. So just because I can quote a father or say something, make a moral statement, doesn't really mean that I'm actually engaging in serious moral reflection. Just like quote, being able to post a series of studies on one side or an issue or another doesn't mean that I'm actually engaging in scientific argumentation. I'm just quoting. And I think a lot of harm happens when we just sort of, wade into a conversation that we don't really understand, or an issue that we don't really understand. there are things certainly that we can say. Violence is wrong. Doesn't matter if the violence is to overturn what people think is a fraudulent election or to end police racist behavior. Actions that put at risk life and property are immoral and need to be excluded. I think the temptation that we fall into as clergy is that we don't want to make those small statements about specific things which are wrong, but we want to make grand, sort of overarching statements. We want to engage in a grand narrative, and I think the broader the statement is, probably the less prudent it is to make.
Yeah, I want to get back to what you said earlier about, feelings. If I feel the need to say something, I should
Yeah,
probably step back.
yeah,
One of the problems that I run into, I mean, I have an ego that, a huge, huge ego. And that ego convinces me that my feelings of truth are indicators of my being
yeah,
right. So, and then the fact that I can quote studies, or I can
yeah,
quote fathers, or I can quote scripture, just reinforces this idea that those two things are congruent.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and so knowing that humility is the mother of virtues, right?
Mhm.
I have to, if I'm having a hard time with my ego, it's
Right.
easier for me to control my mouth or, whatever that is.
Yes.
So is there, which one is likely to cause the most damage, right? Weighing in on something to provide moral clarity and weighing in on something and getting that moral clarity wrong.
Well, Saint Paisius, newly glorified saint, says in some place, I've never regretted keeping silent. Um, I think I think if you want to weigh in on a moral issue, I think that's one of the ways that I mean, sort of after the fact, that what you've done in a good spirit, is how you respond to disagreement. I was a little sharp with someone this on Sunday, but just after liturgy, I'm tired. But so we all have those moments. I do, when we respond maybe more sharply than we need to. Probably doesn't help that at the moment our coffee hour is outside, and oh yeah, I live in Wisconsin and it's January. So, but how do I respond when people ask me questions or disagree with me? Am I able to maintain a temperate, moderate tone? Or am I sharp? Am I sarcastic? Am I judgmental or dismissive? If I really, really think that the world is divided into discrete social groups of good people, my side, and evil people, the other side, that's probably an indication that it's my ego speaking, if not something else more infernal. Um, so I mean, there's those kinds of things. Um, you had said a moment ago about when we really feel something is true. There's interesting there's an interesting thing in the psychology of human memory, is that we tend to evaluate the validity of a memory based on the intensity of the affect. So the more we feel, whether good or bad, about a memory, the intensity of that feeling will take that as a substitute for validity. So it's just, I feel really strongly this bad thing happened to me, so it must be true. Well, maybe. I feel really strongly that there's this problem in society, so it must be true. Well, maybe. And notice I didn't say probably not, but just maybe. And maybe that's probably a very good clue. Can I tolerate maybe as a response to my conviction? Or do I become defensive, reactive? Do I push back? Um, I've had some conversations on Facebook with people where at the end they'll say, well, look, we're not getting anywhere, so why don't we just stop? And, it actually just happened. One individual posted this, not only responded to my, let's just stop by continuing the conversation, but then he went around to 2 or 3 other posts on my page and pasted the exact same comment. It's like, am I doing stuff like that? Am I not letting it go? Am I ruminating, or even if I'm not speaking, am I ruminating? Is it something that I'm recycling or regurgitating in my own brain?
Yeah, and that's a sign of, a perverse motivation, right? A motivation that is ego-driven rather than truth-driven.
Yeah, and it might be ego-driven. I might just be afraid. I think a lot of people are really afraid on both sides. And my experience here in Mad City is that pointing this out does not make me popular. How can you not see that the other side is evil?
Yeah, and that's kind of my shtick, right? If I'm in a tribe, it's in the tribe that says, I said in my amazement, every person is a liar. And,
Yeah,
and saying, yeah, compare these two things,
yeah,
and do the comparison that makes whoever you're talking to aware, or try to create a sympathetic link with the other, right? And it doesn't
yeah,
work. It doesn't work. Instead, what they do is nowadays, they'll just put me in that other tribe. It
right,
allows them to just completely write me off. Like you tell me something I don't want to hear. Well, yeah, that's because you're one of them. You have a
yeah.
PhD, you live in Madison, you're obviously that.
Yes, except of course that I have a PhD. I live in Madison, and I'm not that. I'm them. Because yeah, this for me has been the great revelation about living in Madison, uber progressive secular Madison. Um, is it really brought home to me how much both sides, for all their disagreements on practical issues, basically, these great divisions between liberals and conservatives, progressives and or traditionalists or believers and secularists. The emotional content is and even the rhetorical strategies are almost all the same. Um, when you control for specific issues, it's like, yeah, everybody's a baby whose diaper needs to be changed. And it's like, wow, there's just a lot of diaper rash out there.
One of the things that I was hoping would
Not
happen,
even going to be nice about it. Go ahead.
that's beautiful. One of the things I was hoping would happen over the past year as a side effect of COVID was that we would all elevate our game. It's an opportunity for us
Yeah,
to understand how science is done, how scientific findings are applied, how they are
right.
adjusted, and so on. So, everyone in the world, but here, everyone in America, had an opportunity to really just learn how this is done.
Right.
And instead, we've just completely missed that opportunity. And we are, I would say, worse off now,
Yeah.
intellectually, discernment-wise, than we were a year ago.
Yeah.
Because now this process, this polarization has gotten so deep, and we have words for it now. So I have words that keep me from having to grow. So if someone points out, so one of the sets of words is conspiracy theory, lack of discernment. You have fallen into this kind of groupthink,
Yeah.
right? And now they've got words for it. And then the response is, whether they are or not, gaslighting, propaganda, this,
Yeah.
right? So I can't hear criticism.
No, I can't. I immediately react. I react defensively immediately. Um, yeah, it is. I mean, it really is. a problem. I have scientists in my parish, and and good scientists. And the point I've made with them is, you're a great scientist. That doesn't necessarily make you an expert in epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge. Um, and so we'll talk through things, and they'll get it. They'll get it when I talk through it. But I think a lot of times, for example, scientists are used to talking to other scientists, just like clergy are used to talking to other clergy. So I think sometimes we use in-house language, which is not always helpful, which does tend to create a distance. We also tend, and I've seen this, people on both sides will use scientific data as a way of making a moral argument instead of making a moral argument. So they'll jump from is to ought, and it's just like, you can't get an ought from an is. I mean, that's like, it's just like a basic principle of epistemology. Because something is doesn't mean it ought to be. So there are these kinds of clues of trying to have a sense of humility about human knowledge and what we can and can't know. I've had a lot of people complain to me, so, well, CDC and World Health Organization weren't recommending masks at the beginning, and my response is always saying, well, yeah, but it's science, and science talks in terms of probability, and policy or recommendations change with data and circumstances. So we expect it to be different.
Yeah, and so when they get it wrong at the beginning, which is just, that's how it goes.
Right.
They're making their best guess, educated guesses,
Right.
and then adjusting, right? And here's why.
But you can't present your best guess as anything other than what it is.
Right. And the problem is policy gets made out of it, and a lot of expectations are set according to that.
Right.
Based on the numbers we were given at first about infection rate, and mortality rate, right, this was going to be just completely awful, right? And so, it does make sense to just, back off, right? But later on, and that's the affect, that's the grounding affect. Another part of psychology is you have this thing where that the one who gets the first bid affects the entire negotiation, right? So you get in there and you say, this thing is something to be afraid of, boom, right? And then later on we're like, bad, not that bad, right?
Yeah, and thank God.
And thank God, right?
But nobody's saying thank God.
They're saying it was all a plandemic.
So those damn irresponsible scientists at the CDC and the World Health Organization and the Chinese and Trump and the Democrats, and it's just like, really, truly, I mean, the entire world, not the entire world, but at least so many people seem so incredibly angry that it's not as bad as it could have been. And I mean, now in fairness, I mean, wherever you stand on, for example, lockdowns and masks, you generally agree with the other side that it is really, really a bad thing, that it wasn't as bad as it thought. Can I put you on hold for just a second? I got something coming in. Hold on.
Yep. And I'm going to talk. So, and Father Gregory and I are less interested in the actual facts that are going on than we are in the process, discerning the process and what our role is. And so if you take the gist of this conversation so far, what you'll see is, we, as clergy, we sometimes wade in pretty heavy. If we had said, this is the role of the Christian in a crisis, and we had modeled that, right? What is the role of the Christian in the crisis, rather than picking a side in that crisis, then we can minister to everyone, and we're not affected by, changes in diagnosis of the crisis. And when Father Gregory gets back, We're going to talk about some of the what this has done to trust in the church and how pastors can help heal that damage, because this has been a huge consequence, right?
Right.
If oh, are you there?
Yeah, no, I just sorry. Something was the heat had run on, and I was going to stop being able to hear you in a second.
Oh,
It's Wisconsin.
so look at the sacrifices you're willing to make for this audience, right? So the temperature is probably going to drop, what, 5 degrees every 10 minutes?
It's not quite that bad, but it's it's
John
yeah. I had to
Carpenter's The Thing, right?
yeah I had to turn off the heat and the space, or lower the heat temperature and the space heater, or I was going to start drowning you out. But yeah, but go ahead.
So, what, remember, the main point here is to talk about the role of the pastor, the priest,
Right.
in the middle of crisis, right? And to do kind of a hot wash, a lessons learned
Yeah.
from our COVID response, right? And then also, we should have learned a lesson, right?
And we didn't.
And we didn't, or
Well,
else we
let me
would be
rephrase that.
behaving differently right now in the midst of this political crisis.
Yeah. Well, let me rephrase it, because that's a little harsh. Um, and as my mom is happy to tell me, honey, you tend to be harsh. She's like, yeah, okay, fair enough, mom. Of course, when you need me to be harsh, that's nothing. But that's my mom. It isn't that we haven't learned the lesson from COVID. I think we're in the process of learning the lesson, and I think it's going to take quite a while for us to process all this and come to whatever sort of policy and personal conclusions we come to. Same with the election. But I think there are some things there are some touchstones that we have as Orthodox Christians, and so as pastors of souls, and there are two really. The first one is everyone dies, and that seems rather harsh and rather rude to mention, but in fact everybody dies. And I was talking with a friend here who's an evangelical pastor, and in the conversation, one of the things I said to him was like, Pastor, does it strike you as strange that everyone you talk to is surprised that they're going to die? And he was like, yeah. But I mean that's the takeaway from COVID. Everybody dies. Um, every single person I meet is in the process of dying. I am everyone I meet, I'm standing at their deathbed. If I realize that, I'm going to have different conversations. But we don't want to acknowledge that. We don't want to acknowledge the fact that we're going to die, that the people we love are going to die. I know when I do premarital counseling with people, one of the things I tell the couple is like, look, here's the thing you need to understand about marriage. It always ends in betrayal, divorce or death. But the fact of the matter is, someday the person you're married to is going to just betray you and just they're going to leave, and it's going to be hard. And it's like, well, but death is like, yeah, but talk to enough surviving spouses, and yeah, just there's anger, there's depression, there's all sorts of stuff, because the marriage ended and they never really realized. They knew, but they didn't know.
So this is the first one, and I want to bring
This
you
is the
out
first one.
because it always strikes me when you say this. How does framing or providing that context, how does that change the way that I pastor
Yeah.
in the middle of a crisis?
Well, how would I here, let's maybe ask myself, actually, maybe ask this: is this something I would say in the ICU? I mean, really and truly, in the ICU, am I going to have a conversation with the physician, the nursing staff, about the inadequacies of research data as it pertains to the needs of my parishioner? Am I going to have a conversation with my parishioners like, look, you just have to have faith. Pull out that respiratory tube. Pull out the IVs. I mean, no, we're not going to say any of that. That's ridiculous. So I mean, we understand that the person in the bed is dying. Well, but so's the physician standing over the bed. So's the priest standing over the bed. So we say things with, I mean, and I do it too. I say things without any awareness that this might be the last word I speak to this person.
Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things that many of us priests, we live in a world of ideas,
Yeah.
with like theological ideas, dogma, doctrine, sacrament, all these things. And that's the level, that's the way that we engage with other people
Right.
oftentimes.
Yeah.
When you're at that bedside of someone who's dying, it's theologically informed, it's idea informed, but it's the connection. It's the love, it's the assurance, it's the reminder, right?
Yeah.
And that really is, that's the MDiv, right? That's what you were there
ideal.
for. That is
Yeah.
what you were there for, is that moment, being present in that moment. And if we preach that way, right? If we did coffee hour that way, if we did online interactions that way,
Yeah.
it'd be a lot different.
Then
We would disagree. We could still disagree
Right.
about, in the middle of a medical crisis, should we consider alternate methods of distribution?
Right.
Right. But the disagreement would not become dogmatic.
Right.
It would be pastoral life and death.
Hopefully, because a lot of times, talking to people as if they're going to die does not get a good response. But one way of summarizing our job as clergy, well, my job is to help you die well. There are other people out there, and God love them, who work hard to put off that moment. And there are other people out there who are concerned with economics and public policy and politics and architecture and all sorts of really cool and great things. Our job as clergy is to help people die well. And it's interesting. From the point of view of developmental psychology, Eric Erikson talks about the 8 stages of the life cycle. And he says the last stage is ego integrity versus despair. And he says, the cultivation of wisdom at the end of life gives us the ability to accept our lives, in their totality, with success and failure. And so what I would say to my students is like, if you read Erikson carefully, what he's saying is the goal of human development is to die well. I mean, this is not just a spiritual or theological concern, a moral concern. It's also a psychological concern to die well. And if there's a lesson from COVID, is that most of us are not about the business of dying well, which means we don't live well. Yeah. I am much. Yeah. 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 Uh, right. Right. One of the things I mentioned in the dogmatics class last semester is, and actually the Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev, the Moscow Patriarchate, talks about this in his book on Orthodox Christianity. He says, he says the infallible source of Orthodox dogmatics is found in our liturgical tradition. And when you listen to the services of the church, it is inescapable that we are concerned with dying well, because all of our services, it's there in the litanies. You know, I want to have a good answer at the last judgment. I want to live the rest of my life in peace and repentance. So there's nothing morbid about this, though it can become morbid. But as a matter of dogma, you know, learning to die, learning to learning to die well is our fundamental challenge. And the late Father Alexander Schmemann said, so if what we're about is being able at the last moment of our life to willingly give ourselves over to Christ. To not rebel against death, but to take it as that invitation, to everlasting life, and to surrender ourselves. And you see this in the saints. You see this in the martyrs. They die well, which means they give themselves over, to death. They are not afraid of death anymore. They embrace it. They welcome it, not in a depressed or a suicidal fashion, but in the hope of the resurrection. So that's the COVID lesson, I think. Is that we and Orthodox Christians are as guilty of this as anyone else. We are not about the business of dying well. We resent it. Sorry, too much existentialist literature
No, that's great.
as a young man.
And I'm going to give you a warning here, because you are getting older, right? We're going to come back to
I-
that second thing, right? So if you're like me, it's already gone into vaporware.
Yeah.
But let's go back to
Yeah.
some lessons learned,
Okay.
right? So a very useful way of approaching my ministry, even in the midst of crisis, is, what is it at its basic level? Life in Christ, preparing for death. Okay, I get that. Does my training, does my position, does my experience as a priest, does it provide me any additional leverage when it comes to things like understanding vaccines, understanding the inner, globalism, understanding public policy, any of these things? What's the additional leverage that I get?
As a priest, I don't know about any of those things. It's funny, because I've had to go back, because people have been sending me studies and things. As an undergraduate, I actually, as it happened, I worked at the VA, working as a researcher doing drug trials. And so I'm realizing, wow, I have not actually had to deal with stuff like this since I was in my late teens, early 20s. It's hard, and I don't like it, but I can still follow. But that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a priest. That's idiosyncratic. But this idea that somehow as a priest I have a unique perspective on globalism or vaccines or politics. That's just arrogant, honestly. I don't know, and I don't have any.
And if we're not
Special.
careful, the priesthood can reinforce arrogance, right? This
Well,
is one of
yeah,
the wonderful things that Metropolitan Jonas said at his enthronement. He said, look, you dress, of course you're going to get weird behavior. Look what you've done. You've dressed us
yeah.
up, right? And you treat us as if we're all that, right?
Well, yeah.
I'm
And
accustomed, because of the structure of liturgy, I'm used to people being quiet when I present wisdom.
yeah, and I'm married to an attorney who's not at all shy about making a face when I say something unhelpful in the sermon or going on too long, which is, by the way, a very good thing. But
Great blessing.
actually, when I was a newly ordained priest, it really bothered me that people would be, from my perspective, inappropriately confrontational. And it's like, other priests don't have this. And it took me a while to realize, oh, thank God, people are like this. It's like, see, as a new priest, I thought I was failing. As a not new priest, I realized, yeah, I'm doing it right, man. People are not afraid of me. They're not putting up with my crap. I
Yeah,
say, yeah,
you,
and this is what you want, but it is. I mean, I think your point though is well taken. The fact of the matter is, we dress up in pretty clothes, we stand in front of a group of people, and they listen to us. Unless, of course, you're good at reading body language, and then you realize not so much. But yeah, that depressed respiration during the sermon, that's not a good sign. I'm putting them to sleep. But you're right. I mean, we are used to being listened to, and especially if I mean, but this is the reality. I mean, we also tend to self-select the people in our congregations, um, directly or indirectly. We tend to move along the people who give us um, stress or aggravation. A couple of years ago, the bishops sponsored a study on how on the view of the parish between basically priests and lay leadership. And I read the study, and it's like, well, this is just silly because in the methodology, the priest chose the leaders. It's like, all right, so this is a study about how the priest and the people he likes best think about the parish, which may or may not have any relationship to how other people in the parish see it. And it's just but I mean, you're right. I think you're right. I think Metropolitan Jonah was right. They dress us up, they stand us in front of the room, and everyone listens to our pearls.
now, but surely, I mean, I am a priest. I pray. I've got this charisma, right? This grace that's been given. Surely I can recognize the ethics of something or the morality of something in a way that others don't, and then
Yeah,
I can weigh in on that.
yeah, not in my experience.
Not even giving me that, huh?
Now, I know, well, not nothing. Well. Look, I trained in ethics, actually moral theology, um, and I've published in moral theology, um, and it just takes work, and the grace of the priesthood makes up that which is lacking, but it doesn't fill in for classes you didn't take and work you didn't do. Quite the contrary, the assumption of the prayer of ordination is that I'm going to screw up and God will fix it. I mean, to put it very directly. Um,
And that's when you are reading words, perfect words, that the church has given you, that it is
right.
scripted.
Yeah.
And the bishop, I think this is normative, right? The bishop told me, he said, don't you ever serve without your book,
Yeah.
right? Well, okay, so I go out here and now I'm in the field of public policy.
Right.
And,
Professionally, you're in the field of public policy.
well, I mean, just anybody, right? Public
Anyway, okay.
policy or globalism or whatever it is, right? And that's not written in the book. So I have feelings. But one of the things that Orthodoxy's taught me is you don't trust your feelings. Orthodoxy trains your feelings, but it's
Right.
incomplete training and you can't rely on it.
I, yeah. Some, I'll tell people, look, here's the thing about feelings, they lie. Well, what do you do with your feelings, Father Gregory? I have a little pretty box that I put them in. I stuff them in that box and I lock it. You stuff your feelings? Yep, I sure do. That's unhealthy. No, only if I don't know I'm doing it. Because my feelings come and go.
Yeah, so here's one of the concerns that I hear,
Yeah.
right? There are moral dimensions to everything that we do.
Yeah.
And if the church isn't present in the dialogue, then it's just going to be completely secular and godless. So, in that situation, what is the role? What is my role as a pastor in the public square?
Um, My role is to provide guidance for the people in my congregation who actually know about this stuff. I remind the scientists of the epistemological limits of empirical research. I remind the politicians of the moral aims of government and the limits of the authority of the city of man relative to the city of God. I remind the married couples that their primary task after loving God is to love each other, and it's this, above all else, that will help their children to grow up to become healthy, happy, and holy. But I would know. I don't think I should anymore walk into the public square and pronounce on issues that I have no understanding about beyond what I read in the newspapers. By the way, I read 3, 4 every day. But I shouldn't go into the public square any more than I should walk into the middle of your living room and proceed to tell you how to be married. So maybe that for me is always kind of the standard. Is that what I'm about to do in the public square? Would I do that in someone's living room? Would I without invitation, proceed to tell people how to be married? And even with invitation, would I? I talk to priests all the time who are anxious about hearing confessions, who are hesitant to offer any sort of personal counseling or coaching, but they have opinions about politics and globalization. Yeah, that's just diluted. I mean, it is. It just stick to your knitting, as they say.
And even there, be humble,
Yeah,
right? I haven't been doing this as long as you, but I've studied,
yeah,
both, I've studied how humans
yeah,
deceive themselves, how they
yeah,
deceive others,
yeah.
and I still don't claim any kind of insights into someone else's motivation.
It just no. I don't. I don't know my own mind. And actually, we talked about that in the dogmatics class last semester. The first thing you need to know as Orthodox Christians about God is that God is incomprehensible. And God is not incomprehensible because we are finite. God is incomprehensible because he is God. And God is known only to God. And then the corollary from that is very clear. If I do not understand God, I cannot understand the work of God in your heart. And if I'm honest with myself, I don't understand the work of God in my own heart. So there are touchstones. If, for example, a couple comes to me and says they're Orthodox Christians and they're living together, with all that may imply, I can't give them Holy Communion because that extends that violates the conscience of the church. But I don't know what God is doing in their lives, so I don't need to get all worked up about it. My friends who are gay, it's like, oh, you're gay and you're living with someone. I'm not going to get worked up about it. I mean, we can have a conversation about where you and the church disagree, or I'm just like, well, you're my friends and I love you and I hope you're happy. And the rest I leave to God because I don't know what God's going to do. I don't know about you, but I'll wake up in the middle of the night and recount my sins. It's like, oh well, yeah, okay, and now I'm a priest. You, you know, um,
So, just to summarize,
yeah,
no
yeah,
special discernment about another's motivations,
nope,
no special discernment given about how the international system works, No special discernment about the intentions of any group of
Mm-mm,
rulers
mm-mm,
or voters.
mm-mm.
No special discernment
Nothing.
about being able to figure out what really happened at this place at this time.
Hmm. And this is a nice way to sort of go into the politics of it, because I mean everything we've been talking about is human frailty and the fact that we are that our goal is to die well. Heidegger says we're a being towards death, and the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas comes along and says, Heidegger got it wrong. We are not being towards death. Death is being towards us. You know, because death is the realization that all my plans have come to naught. I don't even get to choose the moment of my death. Death takes me unaware. The best I can hope for in Christ is to accept that moment that is utterly beyond my control. But so I don't know what's going on in people's hearts, but that doesn't mean that we have to, in an absolute sense, just be agnostic to things around us. During the summer here in Madison, we had riots on a pretty regular basis, and my church is downtown, within walking distance of the state capitol. And I would go into church in the morning and do what needed to be done, and then I'd go for a walk in the neighborhood, and I would just visit with people who had been cleaning up from their riots over the last couple of days. And I was pretty direct. I thought then, I think now, that the governor of Wisconsin and the mayor of Madison really failed in one of their primary moral obligations as elected officials, which is to maintain the peace. Um, we pray that in liturgy. We ask them to guard our our governors so that we can live lives of peace and repentance. And they allow they don't. I mean, you can make an argument as to whether or not they could have responded in the prudential order differently to the riots, but I mean, they express sympathy with the rioters, and that's not acceptable. Um, but
Because the behavior was not acceptable.
right, yeah, it was a threat to life and property,
Yeah. So
and yeah,
you don't have to
and
judge their hearts. You don't have to look into their
no,
minds. What were
no,
their intentions?
yeah,
What was the action?
don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, as our libertarians friends say. But I think we can say that. We can say in the political order, it's we can say in the moral order, it's wrong to commit abortion. Um, but one of the things I've noticed, especially, I mean, not just clergy, but Christians generally, both sides really, and I had mentioned this on Facebook. People are engaged in two different conversations simultaneously. Um, I'm in pain, and it's the fault of your ideology. But then you turn around and say, well, but I don't think ill of you, so it must be your ideology that, I mean, and you have these bizarre um, confusion of conversations. But we can say, I think, things about discrete events that happen. But again, even to say that requires some grounding in Orthodox social teaching. Some sense of, at least in the U.S., some sense of the nature of the role of government in American life, sort of classically understood, and then as it's developed over the centuries. Um, you know, it doesn't help, frankly, that we have many clergy for whom private property is anathema. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
and so,
you know,
and this, now we're getting in, both, we've studied this. We've
yeah,
actually put
yes,
in the sweat, to read the books and to study and look at
yeah, yeah, yeah.
many different sides of issues when it comes to economic policy. And it doesn't mean we've got it right, by the way.
No.
It just means we've read a lot of the ways that people claim to get it right and a lot of ways to get it wrong. And so I can imagine, a system where, a system that is supported by an Orthodox church, Orthodox citizenry that doesn't have public property. I don't think it would thrive, right?
Right.
I think it would have a lot of problems with respecting people, and it would have a lot of problems getting people fed, and that kind of thing. But what I heard you say is, look, you have to understand if you're going to pray for the government, you're praying for that government, a specific government. You're
Yeah.
not praying for some kind of abstract government to just, put a force field
No.
around people so that they can pursue
No.
God, right?
Right.
And
At,
yeah, so
no, I mean, at the great instance when we commemorate our God-loving and God-protected country, the United States of America, rather than saying the government and armed forces, I'm pretty clear. Our God-loving and God-protected country, the president, the Congress, the Supreme Court, all civil authorities, the armed forces, everywhere, and all the people. Because I do think, at least in the American system, that's actually the government. I
yeah.
mean, all of these different offices, basically. But we do pray for the success of our government, and that's whether the head of state or the leader of the government is Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Queen
And
Elizabeth.
so we've got a transition coming up that
Yeah,
many people are uncomfortable with, right?
yeah.
Many people
Well,
are celebrating, but many people are also
okay.
uncomfortable with.
Yeah,
Can, we're gonna get some hate mail. So, looking at the Bill of Rights,
yeah,
right? Love the Bill of Rights. I love the Declaration of Independence. I love our Constitution.
yeah.
Let's say that the Second Amendment gets reinterpreted.
Okay.
Can I still pray for that government?
Yeah. The government. I mean, we prayed for Hitler during the Second World War.
Again, I don't believe, as a political scientist, I don't believe that system is as efficient.
Oh no, it's wicked and evil.
Right. But
I'm going to put my moralist hat on for a
yeah,
minute.
that's different.
Yeah.
And you are very interesting, Father Gregory, because one of the things that I celebrate is the American Revolution. My family played a part in the American Revolution, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They were violent men.
They were. Yeah, they were. And my family had their own little thing that they did during the Texas War of Independence, and then I suspect later probably in the Civil War.
So give me some advice. So I have a friend that calls me and says, "Hey, look, they've gone over the line. They've passed over the red line. Um, you know, keep your powder dry and meet us at X at Y." Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is my response, and when does that response change? What circumstances allow
Yeah.
me, as a moral Christian person?
Yeah. A couple of things come quickly to mind. First of all, the only justification for the use of force is in defense of human life. Um, it's optional. I think morally it's optional in the case of my own life. I don't think it's optional in the case of my defending your life. So I'm free to get shot if that's what I want to do. I don't think I'm free to let you get shot if I can prevent that. That's not something I want to be involved with. By the way, just so we're clear, I don't want to. I don't own a gun. I don't want to shoot. I don't own a gun because I don't want to shoot anybody. And the reason I don't want to shoot anybody is because if I'm going to shoot someone, I'm going to kill them. That's the goal. I mean, and there are times when that is not only acceptable but the morally good thing to do. Sorry, it's just true. Deal with it. So the very first thing is it's like, yeah, if they're coming for your gun, I'm sorry, you got an obligation to turn it over. It might be a stupid law. It might be an unjust and unconstitutional law, but it does not rise to the level of something that justifies deadly force. And I mean, and I have people in my life who go out in the woods in states which will not at this juncture be named, and they play cosplay soldier. None of them have been in the military, and they put on their fatigues and go out there with their semi-automatic weapons, and it's like, yeah, I'm not sure that's a real good idea, but it's probably harmless. So I don't get to use deadly force to protect my Second Amendment rights. And as Christians, I actually told people this on Sunday. Except when the government is asking us to do something which is to worship false gods or which is against the moral tradition of the church, we have an obligation to be obedient. So whether I like it, whether I agree with it or not, whether I think the law is prudent or not, if the government says, Father Gregory, you have to maintain social distance of 6 feet in your church and everyone needs to wear a mask, I can think to myself, this is a stupid law, wholly imprudent and absolutely unnecessary, and I have to do it. and that, yeah, and by the way, I'm not taking a stand on the health regulations, but if I disagree with them, I am free to enter into the public square, make that argument to my representatives in editorials, try to get the law changed by peaceful means. But that, by the way, is on the other side of the door of the church. Gregory. Depends on what it is, actually, because I haven't renounced my my rights as a citizen by ordination, though I do need to evaluate the sort of the pastoral effects of signing that petition. As a personal matter, I have no public political positions on those issues about which the church has not already spoken. So I think abortion abortion laws are unjust. I think it's inappropriate to redefine marriage. Oh, look, I've now run out of things the church has spoken about, at least in an American context. Well, I mean, well, actually, there's a third one. You shouldn't use torture to elicit a confession. Please note, I said to elicit confession, not as a punishment for freely confessing, but because we did some bad things, or at least Orthodox Christian governments have. So outside of abortion and the definition of marriage, the church has not really spoken about these kinds of policy issues, which is fine, by the way. I think policy is a prudential matter, and even with things like same-sex marriage and abortion, how to respond to that, what prudential policy looks like, in a way which is compatible with the moral tradition, admits to a number of possibilities. My own preference is, with marriage, for example, is just to do away with marriage licensing laws and let them sign a contract and register it with the state. And
it's very libertarian of you. The state's job is to enforce contracts.
Yes,
not to decide what a religious right is.
Well, exactly. And as a priest, I think that would be swell, because that would mean it's like, if Billy and Sue want to get married in the Orthodox Church, they have to sign an Orthodox contract, which would specify, the conditions under which the marriage could be dissolved. As opposed to what we have now, which is the state walking in and saying, "Oh, no, we'll just get rid of it."
So, Father Gregory.
Yes.
So, yeah, this is very good, and I did want to make sure people heard you about. Look, no violence. No violence.
No violence. No, there's just no violence. We've had protests here about COVID and things like that, where people who were not happy with the public health regulations showed up at the Capitol with long guns. And it's like, hey, y'all, that's just dumb.
So is a show of strength that's implied violence? Is that what you're saying?
I think if you pick up a weapon and march around state capitol or the U.S. Capitol or stand in front of someone's house, that's not an implied threat. I mean, I mean,
Going out on a limb here.
Pardon me?
Going out
Yeah,
on a
go on
limb
the
here.
limb. It's like, yeah, it's just, come on. I mean, the whole point of doing that is to intimidate.
And y'all walk and chew gum at the same time, right? As an American, yeah, it's perfectly legal for you to do that. What we're saying is that not everything legal is moral.
And not everything which is moral is prudent in the moment.
So, do you have time to go on to your second lesson learned?
Oh,
Or do we
yeah.
need to do this on a
No,
separate
no,
show?
no, we'll do that real quick.
Okay.
So, um, and it really, I mean, the government thing, and it sort of flows out of the anthropology that we're all going to die, and it's the biblical injunction: put not your trust in princes and sons of men in whom there is no salvation. It's I have listening to Christians, especially not just conservative Christians. I was going to say conservative Christians, but liberal, progressive Christians as well. A lot of people seem to be really irritated that the government is not compelling people to live a particular moral vision. And what it's like, let's I think a restaurant that puts a sign out in the window that says, colored people not welcome, there I have two thoughts immediately. It's like, well, that's just morally horrible, and good for you for putting the sign in the window, because now I know not to eat there. Honestly, it's just like, cool. Okay, it's like you don't like black folks, which means you don't like my nephews and my niece. And hey, cool. All right, I'm just not going to eat there. I mean, it's fine. Someone wants to eat there, and all right, that's whatever. So I don't want to force him to serve people he doesn't want to serve. But I think he's a jackass. Uh,
And that is only one of many
it-
policies that can be pursued.
yeah, and yeah, and but the thing of it is though. Um,
So you were saying that
so what I was saying
some
is a
of us
lot
get
of us
upset that the government isn't reinforcing our
our vision.
set of morals, our vision. And I also see the opposite. I say, look, not only that, they are enforcing a moral vision that is antithetical to mine.
Yeah. Well, and they are, and sorry, just answering a text that didn't get answered. No, you know, yeah, when I mean governments work best. I mean governments work by coercion. And I do think there are a lot of Christians on the left and the right who are really upset that the government is not coercing the right people. And gosh, maybe I'm outing myself as an unrepentant libertarian, which I understand is a theologically dubious position, according to one of my friends. Of course, I live in Madison, so I'm not so much a libertarian by conviction, but geography. People drew the way they draw the lines here. It's like, oh, I guess I'm libertarian, but we Christian. I think a lot of Christians want government to do the hard work that we're disinclined to do. I listen to my friends, for example, who are politically active on marriage issue and the definition of marriage, and I think to myself, okay, so let's assume tomorrow first, how do you expect to win? Well, we need to change hearts and minds. All right, well, but that's an evangelical question, not a political question. So if you change people's hearts and minds, it doesn't really matter what the law is. Well, it has a symbolic importance. Okay. But let's be honest, one of the reasons that we're in the position that we're in is on marriage is that we outsource the hard work of preparing people for marriage to the state. We all know priests who've been priests 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And you ask them, have you ever refused to marry someone? Oh, no. Really? 40 years. Every single couple who stood in front of you wanting to get married were ready to be married psychologically, emotionally, morally, spiritually. I find that statistically dubious. But we've outsourced marriage. We've outsourced education, healthcare. We forget, but I live in Wisconsin, so I can't forget. The secular progressivism is just, the latest iteration of the progressive movement that began here in Wisconsin, which was very much the movement of well-intentioned Christians. But so we want the government to do stuff for us and to run the show for us and get people to do what we want. I think there's some good evidence to suggest that that doesn't work very well. We want to be an established church, but establishing a church fails. You were going to say?
Yeah. So just tying it up with what we said earlier, right? So my attention is drawn to these big frameworks and these big solutions, right? When as a priest, I'm not trained, and those big muscle movements, those are the ones that have the most unanticipated consequences.
Yeah.
Negative externalities, all this, it just goes sideways, right? What I am trained to do, and the way that my understanding is that the church is repatterning creation, is through relationships, through local relationships, through the repatterning of my mind, the repatterning of my relationships with the people in my life, right? Not by trying to figure out, the math for the perfect policy.
No. Yeah. And I've mentioned this to my own community. We need to become expert. We need to become practiced in the small statements, the small things. It's pointless. I wrote an essay for the Acton Institute a couple of weeks ago on social happiness survey, basically, and it said a lot of Black people, a lot of gay people were just felt basically they were afraid. And you know what? This is for a variety of reasons, some objective, some subjective. And my response was, it doesn't really matter to me why they're afraid. They're afraid. And that's not a good thing. And maybe they're afraid because they feel unloved, unsupported, at risk. And that's just the case.
So when you see that data, you see it, there's a pastoral response.
Yeah.
Because we know how to deal with a person with a name who is afraid.
Yeah.
We know how the gospel responds to fear.
Yeah.
We may or may not be able to diagnose the structural causes of the fear.
Right.
We may or may not be able to fix those structural causes that are increasing the fear, or even the propagandistic causes of subjective fear.
Yeah.
But I can develop a relationship with someone who is afraid.
I can, and I'm going to put on the social scientist cap for just a minute. All those big, I like that phrase, big muscle movements that you talked about. Those are based on a whole series of abstractions, and it's they conceal as much as they reveal about human life. But just to go back to the individual, if the gay college student I'm talking to is afraid of Christians, he's not going to listen to me. So it doesn't really matter if I change the law. I'm not going to change him. because he's not going to listen to me, and that's my primary task. So the letter to Diogenes, Christians, we're just like everyone else. Wear the same clothes, have the same jobs, eat the same food, but we share, a great phrase, we share our table, not our bed. Christians were distinguished by the moral integrity of their lives. Before we worry about globalization, maybe we should worry about the just and peaceful relationship of the churches. And before we worry about same-sex marriage, maybe we should worry about our divorce rate. Before we worry about abortion, maybe we should worry about abortion laws. Maybe we should worry about abortion in our parishes or contraception in our married couples. Or worry about the environment. Maybe we should worry about fasting. But I understand the attraction of those big movements. But
yeah, and
I don't see it working.
And as a pastor, that's not my role.
No, it really isn't.
My role is to be people, to help them die well.
It is. And government, through no fault of their own, government can't do that.
Yeah, very good. Okay. So,
all right.
So are you, a year from now, do you think, is there a way for us to heal this polarization within the church? Because this, polarization out in society, I studied that as a political scientist, yeah, fine. But the part that really hurts is the polarization within the church, because it keeps us from witnessing the unity, the harmony.
Yeah, and there's a sociologist at Columbia, his name escapes me at the moment, but he makes a really good point. By the time journalists and politicians begin, talking about a particular social phenomena, it's already taken hold. So all the stuff that we think is just happening now has been going on for a very long time, and what we think now is the beginning is probably the end. And it's kind of like a marriage. It ends well before the divorce, and it ends well before the angry words. So there's nothing we can do. It's already been done. I mean, and it's just. Schmemann talks about this in one of his essays. He was talking about the Russians, but I think it's more generally applicable. We love to be known by what we're against, and how we unite around our arguments.
Well, I'm going to be the optimist here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say.
No, I didn't say there was no hope.
Okay.
I just think it's. We want to fix something that's already
Yeah.
We want to prevent something that's already almost done.
Right.
We did a youth retreat with Ukrainian church, at a youth retreat with the Carpatho-Russians, the Greek metropolis of Pittsburgh. Yay, Zoom! I didn't have to go back to Pittsburgh. But Metropolitan Gregory of the Johnstown Diocese made a really great observation. He said, because of COVID, we're just doing what's essential. Of course, now we've got to ask, well, if what we're doing now is essential, what were we doing before? And, we've been filling up our parishes and our spiritual lives with things that we clearly don't need when we are confronting our own mortality and the mortality of people we love. We can't go back. We can't prevent what's already large, what's already accomplished. But I think we can make new decisions going forward. Um, I'm not sure what those are going to look like. But this idea that, I mean, the division that we see in our parishes on issues like COVID and the election have always been there. And they were, old calendar, new calendar. I will get occasionally, it's like, the Ukrainian church, it's non-canonical. It's like, well, first of all, your own bishop is in communion with us, so clearly not. But I pointed out to people, hey, find an Orthodox jurisdiction in America that wasn't at one point in schism from its current members. I mean, really and truly. I mean, the OC, the Metropolia, Rokor, Moscow Patriarchate, the Greeks had Republican and Royalist communities. Antiochians had two parallel structures. The Serbians, the Romanians are divided. I mean, there are all these divisions, and it's like, oh, it's Trump or it's Biden. It's like, really, dude, this is what we do.
So, is it okay? So there are two models, right, that you can, when you've got these kind of divisions. One is, kind of the big tent model. So you have a parish that just allows for these differences, right? And then there's the other kind that self-selects. Well, people self-select around the calendar, around attitude towards elections, attitude towards masks, whatever it is, right? Is one to be preferred over the other?
Yeah, the first, because self-selection is an illusion. This is why I'm not a Benedict option person. The only way to maintain the integrity of that self-selected community is to create very rigid, non-porous boundaries around the community relative to the world. Of course, the problem is that every person who comes in is let's use a COVID example, is an infection. They carry with them ideas from the other, unapproved ideas from the other side of the boundary. So once you set that boundary up between frankly, the sect and the world, then you need to create additional boundaries within the sect so it becomes increasingly coercive.
Yeah, and Stark and Fink, in their book on the history of religion in America, they say, when you keep those kind of boundaries up high, that's what leads to growth.
Yeah.
And religions decline once they break down those boundaries. But they weren't talking, it's a matter of degree here. In order to create that kind of cult, for one, you better have a priest who can handle that kind of authority. I don't know a priest who can.
It's empirically impossible.
I know priests who try.
Yeah, and so do I. It's how I someday will buy a boat. But no, you can't do it. Yeah. And the interesting thing about we talk about stagnation. We think, stagnant pond is dead. It's like, no, stagnant pond is not dead. It just has very narrow expressions of life. Only a few things grow in a stagnant pool, and that can trick us into thinking that we're alive, when actually what we are is just slime. And again, this is America. There's 350 million people. Law of large numbers would suggest that in any reasonable size metropolis, I can probably find enough people to sign off on my cult to make it economically viable for as long as I'm,
it's not healthy.
I'm concerned.
But so this is the promise, and this is the way forward, right?
Yeah.
Is to recognize the differences we have with other people in our parish, and to explore those, to develop those through a relationship of sharing, rather than a relationship of adversary.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that person is dying.
Yeah.
And I'm dying too.
Yeah.
Do I want our last word to be about masks?
Right.
We don't have to like it. But yeah, but it is, as you say, it is about fostering those relationships. And I mean, that's what our Lord tells us, that we are to love one another. And it's our mutual love that will attract, and historically has attracted, people to the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Father Gregory, thank you so much for all the time you've given me today. I really do appreciate it, and I know our listeners will appreciate it too. And they'll show us how much they appreciate it by all the love letters they send.
I love love letters. I would prefer cash, honestly.
So, Father Gregory, where can people find you? Where can not find you? Like, where can they learn more about you at the parish you serve?
Well, the parish webpage is madisonorthodox.com. And in these times of COVID, the webpage is largely not functional because nothing really changes. They can go there. They can find me at St. Cyril Methodius Ukrainian Orthodox Mission in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm on Facebook. Sometimes I'm at Acton. If they hang around the world of evangelical mental health professionals, they can find me there. I am surprisingly popular. It's like, I wouldn't like me if I were. But, probably find me at the parish, or on Facebook. Yeah.
Okay. And Lord
I don't
willing,
really do much these days.
they will also be able to find you several more times for many years on this and my other podcasts.
Okay, as God wills. All right.
Until next time, brother. Godspeed.
Thanks, Father. Your prayers. Bye-bye.